Hello and welcome to another RPG in a Box tutorial. In this video, we'll be learning all about palettes in RPG in a Box. If you'd like to see what topics we'll be covering, or if you'd like to skip to a particular subject, check out the chapters in the video description below. Now let's open up RPG in a Box and get started. I am in the Voxel editor and I have the Justin model from the default example game template open. It doesn't really matter what model you have open, you just need some model open so that the Model Tools panel is active. I'm going to drag this helpful handle here to expand the Model Tools panel so we can see all of the palette section at once. This is the palette section. At the top of it is your currently selected color. This is the color RPG in a Box will use when placing or painting voxels. Clicking on the currently selected color will open up a color picker, allowing you to select and use a custom color without overwriting any of the colors in your palette or your model. One of the nice features in RPG in a Box is that while you can limit yourself to using only the colors from a particular palette, you don't have to. You're free to pick and use as many colors in a model as you want. Next to the selected color box is the hex code for that color. You can copy the hex code of the current color or paste a hex code to set the current color to that hex code. To the right of the hex code field is a magnifying glass icon, and clicking it will change the size of the pickable color icons for your palette. So if you're finding it difficult to pick from the default icon size, you can make the icons larger through the use of this icon. Next is the grid containing 256 icons of the colors in your currently selected palette. A palette with less than 256 colors will have additional icons set as black. Clicking on any color icon in this section will make that your currently selected color. Underneath the palette grid is a dropdown containing the palette's name. Clicking the dropdown will open up a list of RPG in a Box's built-in palettes, as well as any palettes you've created or imported into your current project. Your custom palettes are project-specific and will not carry over from one game project to the next. However, it is very easy to import and export palettes. The built-in palettes for RPG in a Box are uneditable and undeletable, and that's indicated by a little lock icon to the right of the palette name. Under the palette dropdown are icons for palette-related functions. The first is New Palette, which will allow you to create a new palette. Let's make a new palette to test it out. I'm going to name mine New Palette. Right now, every one of its 256 colors are black. So let's add some colors to our palette. We can do this one of two ways. By right-clicking one of the color icons, which will open up the color picker, letting us set that particular color. Now, if we already have a selected color that we'd like to add to our palette, we can middle mouse click on any icon in the palette, which will copy the selected color to it. If you don't have a middle mouse button, you can always copy the hex code for your current color, open up the color picker by right-clicking on it, and then paste it in. And if you forget how to copy the selected color or open up the color picker, just mouse over any of the color icons and a tooltip will pop up with the info. The second icon duplicates the current palette. So if you were upset that you can't modify RPG in a Box's built-in palettes, you can, kind of. For example, I'll select the Arna 64 color palette. Duplicate it by clicking the icon, pick a name for it. Now I have a new palette, which is a duplicate of the built-in palette, but it's editable. The third icon lets you import palettes from an external format. It currently supports palettes of up to 256 colors, and it accepts palettes in hex and PNG formats. Lowspec.com is an excellent source for a ton of great palettes, which are downloadable in both PNG and hex formats. I'll leave a link to the palette section of the website in the video description below. The fourth icon, which looks like a little box truck, will let you export your palettes as either hex or PNG files. Remember that custom palettes are specific to the current project in RPG in a Box. So if you create a palette you really like, be sure to export it and save it somewhere so that you can import it to use in future projects. The fifth icon, the star, will set the current palette as the default palette for your current game project. This means that every time you open that project, the palette you set as default will be the palette shown by default in the Model Tools panel. Next is the Rename tool, represented by a pencil. It allows you to rename any custom palette. And finally, the red X is the Delete Palette function, which allows you to delete any custom palettes you've created or imported. And that's all there is for palettes. I hope that now you know everything you need to know to start using, creating, editing, importing, and exporting palettes in RPG in a Box. Thank you so much for watching. If this tutorial was helpful, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in future tutorials, please subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to support Justin as he creates RPG in a Box and me as I create these tutorials, then check out our Patreon. There's a link to it in the video description below. Remember that you are awesome, and I hope that you have an awesome day. Bye-bye!